In the beginning, nobody cared. Canada seemed endless, a green and fertile land that stretched from sea to sea. If you exhausted 1 acre, there were 10 more waiting for you further west. Finally, people reached British Columbia, a huge province, 1.5 times the size of France. Plenty of land for all. Splendor without end was the motto adopted by the pioneers. What went wrong? A close look at BC shows a very small area where people can live and crops can grow. A mere handful of valley bottoms scattered throughout the province. Only 3% of BC west of the Rockies is suitable for farming, and these are the same areas where our growing communities are spreading so rapidly. In fact, in the last 20 years, we lost an average of 10,000 acres per year to urban sprawl. Naturally, farmland is used up first because this is the easiest to service and the easiest to build on. Meanwhile, competition for the world's precious food supply increased. Each year it is estimated that there are 60 million more mouths to feed. That is nearly 160,000 per day, every day in the year. In fact, there will be 2,500 more hungry people after the span of this brief message. And North Americans, who amount to only 6% of the world's population, are already consuming 30% of the world's resources. In addition, new wealth in Western Europe and in Japan has caused an unprecedented demand for world food. No wonder food prices are skyrocketing. BC's traditional sources of supply are also in question. California, with a population that has already reached 20 million people, nearly the size of Canada, may have to look seriously at shutting off the export of food products. The President of the United States has said, Americans will not go hungry, and he recently placed embargoes on the export of food products. Further south again, Mexico's population is growing at an enormous rate, and its standard of living is also rapidly increasing. Both of these to the ultimate detriment of its ability to export food. In light of this, BC had to take firm measures to protect the dwindling supply of agricultural land in the province. It was decided to protect the best classes of farmland. Fortunately, we have the benefit of the great Canada Land Inventory Program. For the past decade, resource scientists of the federal and provincial governments have been studying the agricultural potential of BC in terms of good soils and desirable climates. Mr. Runka will explain how this was done.
As just mentioned, the land's potential for agriculture is determined by 2 factors. 1, the type of soil, and 2, the climate of that particular piece of land. It is a combination of these 2 factors, soil and climate, that dictate the landowner's crop options. As Mr. Lane said previously, good agricultural land in British Columbia is a scarce commodity, for less than 3% of the land area of the province has a soil-climate combination which enables the farmer to grow a reasonably wide range of agricultural crops. Therefore, the major concern at present is with preservation of this good agricultural land rather than with short-term economics. How were the proposed agricultural reserve plans arrived at? Scientists of the Canada Land Inventory Program, after extensive field work, use aerial photography to plot the characteristics of the land, and from these photographs they prepare maps which indicate the land's capability for agriculture as well as for recreation, wildlife, and forestry. Of course, we are primarily concerned here with the agricultural land capabilities. Agricultural capability ratings, based on assessments by experts in soil and climate, have been assigned to land throughout Canada. The ratings range from Class 1 capability for the land with a combination of good soil and climate to Class 7 for land that is virtually worthless for agricultural purposes. In a lot of cases in Canada, of course, the climate restrictions on the capability of the land for agriculture are more severe than the restrictions imposed by the quality of the soil. Remember, it doesn't matter how good the soil is. If the climate restricts you to a certain range of crops, then that is the only range that you can grow. Sometimes the climate overbalances the soil limitation and vice versa. It is a combination of climate and soil capability that gives land its rating. I might mention that the climate inventory is biased toward frost-free period. Certainly we look at things like heat units, which are the measures of heat during the summer, and moisture or precipitation, but the big thing is the frost-free period. Anything that has over 90 days frost-free period has a Class 1 climate rating. Anything that has between 75 and 90 days has a Class 2 climate. 60 to 75 days is a Class 3 climate. 50 to 60 days is a Class 4 climate, and less than 50 days is a Class 5 climate. These soil climate capability ratings are used as a base for the agriculture reserve plans proposed by the Department of Agriculture. The net result is a map similar to this one submitted to you for your information and your use when developing your agriculture reserve plan. This example is in the Prince George area. The yellow units are proposed agricultural reserves and consist of capability classes 1, 2, 3, and 4. 5s and 6s are included where they are very close to the 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s, or form parts of grazing areas such as in the ranching country. The brown color indicates proposed agriculture reserves which have frequent subdivided pockets. The blue units are existing urban subdivisions less than 2 acres. The red units are suggested urban expansion areas equivalent to the size of existing urban areas. The green color is suggested conservation area. The following slides show examples of soil climate capability classes 1 through 7. First, we will look at examples of agriculture capability class 1. I will show you several slides, but don't get the idea that class 1 involves a big area in the provincial scene. Remember, in class 1 we are talking about 0.5% of the total land area of BC. This class 1 area is in the North Okanagan Salmon River Valley area. This field has forages on it now. The previous year it had potatoes. It might well have corn. It has a wide range of cropping possibilities. This vineyard is in the Okanagan Valley. In this province, only 0.01%, that is 1/100th of 1% of the land area of the province, has a climate that is suitable for growing tree fruits and grapes. And of course, not all of the land within that climate area is Class 1. This particular area is Class 1 capability. An example from the delta of the Fraser River, an area that has a capability Class 1. Only very minor soil climate limitations, a long growing season, and a wide range of cropping possibilities. A different type of Class 1 in the Similkameen River Valley near Karamias. This area had irrigated onions on it at the time this picture was taken. Recently, it has been planted to tree fruits. It has a wide range of cropping possibilities under irrigated conditions. Melons, tomatoes, all of our heat-loving crops. An example to show you that it is a soil-climate combination that gives land its rating and is not necessarily related to present land use. This area in the Skeena River Valley has a heavy cover of trees now, and certainly clearing costs would be very high. But at the same time, it has a soil-climate combination that allows for a Class 1 range of crops. It might well be asked, how do we know that it is Class 1 if it has never been used for agriculture? This is a job for the soil specialist and the climatologist to get together on. They compare the area with similar areas that have agricultural crops on them. In many cases, we find that Class 1 areas are being subdivided because they are nice places to live. We have other alternatives, but the Class 1s often provide attractive view lots or are immediately adjacent to urban areas. Now let us go to capability class 2. This involves about 0.75% of the land area of the province. Here we are talking about some minor soil or climate limitation that places the land in class 2. In other words, there are a few less crop options as far as the owner is concerned. A class 2 in the Peace River area, in this case a very suitable soil, but a frost-free period of only 85 to 90 days, which limits the crops that can be grown. Although not particularly obvious from the slide, undulating to rolling topography eliminates the use of some of the highly mechanized agricultural equipment. Also, things like corn might not mature too evenly here. This drops the capability down to class 2 because of the topography. This is the Creston Valley in the West Kootenays. In this case, an area that is in forage now. Fluctuating water tables and some problems with frost damage impose limitations here, and this is the reason that it is in class 2, but there are still a wide range of annual crops that can be grown. The Alkali Lake Ranch in the Caribou, and I'm talking about the cultivated area now, some minor salt problems in the soil as well as a droughty situation place it in class 2. An example in the area between Castlegar and Nelson, an area very short of high capability agricultural land. Class 2s in this case are subdivided into extremely small parcels. This is in the Abbotsford area of the Fraser Valley. These are raspberries on a soil that is fairly shallow to gravel, so the low moisture holding capacity limits the usefulness of the land and decreases the range of crops. An aerial photograph of an area which is being moved onto by urban expansion. This is predominantly class 2 land, and I think the pattern of urban expansion along the access routes and the chopping up into small units of the agriculture areas are obvious. This is Kelowna. Let us now look at the class 3s. Remember that as we go down the scale, less and less cropping options are possible. Class 3 involves 0.75% of the land area of the province. In this case, we are looking at potatoes in the Bulkley Valley east of Smithers, an area with some highly suitable soil, but an average frost-free period of only 60 to 75 days a year. This is a wheat field in the halfway river area of the Peace River, an area where the frost-free period is somewhat limiting, usually around 85 days, and with some minor soil limitations which bring it down to a class 3. I might mention that the class 3s are the last class where we find major commercial production of wheat across the prairies as well as in the northern and southern parts of BC. It is also the last class where we have major commercial production of vegetable crops. This is a class 3 in the lower Fraser Valley, an area growing canning peas. Fluctuating water tables limit the range of crops possible here. Just a reminder again that the capability classification is related to a soil-climate combination and not the present land use. This area, north of Kamloops, is quite capable of growing a class 3 range of crops if irrigation water were available. Another example here from the Okanagan. The last class where you find commercial production of tree fruits and grapes is the class 3. Class 4 has been more or less eliminated by trial and error over the years. Here, an apple orchard has been bulldozed together to make way for houses. An area in the far north, in the Peace River, if the aspen trees were cleared, the land would be capable of a class 3 range of crops. Now, looking at class 4. This is the last class of major concern as far as the agricultural reserves are concerned. And certainly, there is a very limited range of crops that can be grown. It represents about 1 1/4% of the land area of the province. A class 4, which is used for grazing, forages, oats, barley, and some of the very hardy vegetables. Here, we're looking at an area with an extremely good climate in the Fraser Valley, but it has high water tables that limit the earliness that you can get on the land in the spring. This makes it difficult in some cases even to pasture. Therefore, this is rated class 4. It has been said that we are clearing land at a much greater rate than the urbanization is taking lands away from agriculture. This is true, but we must remember that there is quality involved here. The quoted 10,000 acres a year that we are losing to urban development or irreversible uses is in the classes 1, 2s, and 3s, whereas most of the lands we are clearing are in the classes 4s and 5s. From the Fort Nelson area, an area where there is little agricultural development now, but some areas have a capability for growing a Class 4 range of crops. From the Bulkley Valley, a fall rye crop on a Class 4 land. Here, a frost-free period from 60 to 75 days and some topography limitations and minor stoniness will bring it down to Class 4. Another example of a Class 4. In this case, in the Okanagan, stones are a big problem here, but at the same time, the superclimate makes growing crops possible on a very restricted soil. Now, let's look at the last class of arable land, the class that I like to refer to as the forage class. Here, your options are very, very narrow. Forages are about all you can grow. Of course, you can grow forage on all classes of land from 1 to 5. But classes 1 and 2 have a much wider range of other crops that you can grow. The largest acreage suitable for agriculture in BC falls into the Class 5 category. This is Class 5, and you can see that the topography and stoniness are limiting factors. If you look carefully, you can see some shallow rocks sticking out here and there in the fields, certainly limited use land. Another example, south and east of Kelowna in the Okanagan. This area, if under irrigation, could grow forage crops. At present, it is used for grazing. This is a different type of Class 5 that you see here at Matsqui Prairie in the Fraser Valley. It has an excellent climate, but an extremely high water table, which pretty much limits you to a Class 5. Back to the Bulkley Valley, the Utsa Lake area, an area with some excellent soils, but a climate where in a lot of years there were less than 50 days of frost-free period. So you would be limited to growing forage crops and a very narrow range of other crops in ideal landscape positions. This is a Class 5 near Invermere in the East Kootenay. In this case, the area is under Christmas tree production, but has the capability under irrigation to grow forage crops. Class 5 areas, of course, are not particularly conducive to large-scale agriculture when used by themselves. In conjunction with Classes 1, 2, 3, and 4, they can be quite useful as forage producers, but when people try to make a living on Class 5, I think history has shown that there is a lot of heartbreak, such as in this case. Class 5s, of course, can be critical, especially in the ranching areas. In this area, in the Chilcotin, they harvest the meadow-type forage and utilize it as a part of their feed supply. Certainly, Class 5s can be useful in this particular case. We have finished looking at the arable classes. Let's look now at the classes of non-arable land. Class 6 is the grazing class. In this case, we are looking at an area in the Ashnola River Valley in the Similkameen country. Here, there is a conflict between wildlife and domestic livestock. In this case, it's obvious that steep slopes, rockiness, and climate eliminate the use of agriculture on a cultivated basis. Another Class 6, and I'm referring to the area on the far side of the lake, an area of steep slopes which are useful to the ranching production unit. Class 6s are capable of use for the grazing of native forage plants. From the Caribou, west of Clinton, an area that has extreme saltiness but has some suitability for grazing by domestic livestock. The salts would definitely be a very severe limitation to cultivation. An extremely wet area that we would not want to cultivate, but it certainly has some grazing potential during certain times of the year. A Class 6 because of high water tables. We have to remember that Class 6s, especially when we get to the alpine areas, have maximum inter-resource conflicts. with wildlife and recreation, and in this case, mining. Certainly, they can be important areas for grazing, but because of the very short duration of growing period, they are Class 6s. Let's look at the obvious ones now. These are the Class 7s that are of no use to agriculture. They involve almost 90% of the land area of the province. Certainly, the largest area is taken by this type of landscape with rocky areas, extremely steep slopes, or areas that ecologically aren't suitable for grazing over a long period of time. These areas would regenerate to forest vegetation very rapidly in most cases, so we would not want to put them into Class 6. This technical land capability information from the Department of Agriculture forms the basis for the proposed agriculture land reserves, which have been submitted to you for your consideration and revision according to local knowledge and needs. Mr. Lane will discuss the legal aspects of the Land Commission Act.
Now, what about the law? Many states and provinces in North America are tackling the problem. The United States Senate is considering such a law. In the American Committee's words, the increased size, scale, and impact of private actions have created a situation in which land use management decisions of wide public concern are often being made on the basis of expediency, tradition, and short-term economic considerations. All factors contradictory to sound environmental, economic, and social land use considerations. Nearer to home, the states of the Northwest have followed the Senate's lead and have brought forth proposals with similar objectives to those we are implementing in Canada. Ontario has adopted a new Development Act to protect farmland and to combat urban sprawl. Ontario's Minister of Agriculture and Food has stated, "I just don't see how it is possible to pay compensation for land that may be put under land use control." Here in BC, the Land Commission Act was adopted in the spring of 1973 and does two basic things. First, it provides for the adoption by the regional district of an agricultural reserve plan which, when approved by Cabinet and designated by the Land Commission, amounts to an agricultural zone in which only uses compatible with farm use will be permitted. However, it is expected that a large number of compatible uses will be possible in such a zone. The Land Commission Act is more flexible than a conventional zoning bylaw because certain compatible uses may be implied from the Act itself. Certain others will be listed in the regulations, and still others may be made by virtue of an order of the Land Commission. One immediately thinks of golf courses, riding stables, marinas, and summer cottages, built with necessary discretion as being possible compatible uses. Within a reserve, non-conforming uses which were in operation for 6 months before the 21st of December 1972 may be continued, subject only to approval should the non-conforming use be changed from one non-conforming use to another, or should the non-conforming use be sold or leased to others. Second, the Land Commission Act provides for the purchase by the Commission of land for parks, land for greenbelt, and land for land bank purposes. While there is no thought of going into competition with either the Provincial Parks Branch or the Parks Department of the various municipalities of the province, nevertheless, there is room for the acquisition of certain parklands in and around our communities for the betterment of the community as a whole. Similarly, the acquisition of green belts will give some protection to those areas that most of us feel should be conserved for all time and protected from the ever-expanding urban sprawl. Finally, there is provision whereby land bank land may be acquired by the Land Commission in and around our communities in order to establish a reserve for the future growth of our towns and cities. The regional district is expected to hold a public hearing and possibly some information hearings prior to the adoption of the bylaw containing the Agricultural Reserve Plan. The Act also contains procedures for removing land from an agricultural reserve. Provision is made for both aggrieved private owners and the local governments concerned to make application for exclusion. This could be granted in cases of mistake, necessary urban expansion, and in other situations where the public interest is involved. In all 28 regions of the province, responsible people are working to protect British Columbia's agricultural heritage. Now that the facts are known, nearly everyone cares.